All right, good morning. For the past few weeks, we've been kind of looking at how Jesus was unstoppable, right? How he changed history. And not just changed the course of history, kind of how he redefined even what history even is. And now, if you're just joining us today, you're like thinking, oh gosh, really? History? I mean, how many of you struggled with history when you were in school? More, really, come on. 8th grade history class, trying to stay awake, ring a bell. Yeah, there you go. I admit it. You know, sometimes history, I like history. I really do. I find it fascinating to study history. But it can be a struggle even for me. So back in seminary, I had to take an elective. And I was kind of out of electives to take that were available. So I signed up for a class that had this title, The History of Preaching. Let that sink in for a second. The history of preaching. I mean, you think about it, sometimes, except for, of course, Chaparral is different, but it can be hard to stay awake during a normal sermon that's relevant, right? But to study the history of preaching, there are only 2 students signed up. I was one of them. So one day, this is a true story, it was a springtime day in East Tennessee. Nice, warm, beautiful day. I had been up all night, literally, not a wink of sleep, because I had 2 exams that day. I had an advanced Hebrew and advanced Greek exam on the same day. So I'm up all night studying, took the exams, went to my history of preaching class, and half the class was missing. So the professor says, let's go outside, we'll sit on a bench, and I'll read to you from Spurgeon, which is this 18th, 19th century preacher. He said, I'll read to you for a while, and then if we have time, we'll talk about it. It was a 2-hour class. So I'm sitting outside on a warm spring day with no sleep, listening to Spurgeon for 2 hours. It was torture. Because if I fall asleep, the whole class is asleep, right? So, I'm like pinching myself, digging in my heels, whatever I could do to try to stay awake. It was tough. So I get it. History can be boring, difficult at times. Other times, though, history can be kind of fun, interesting. For example, why were the early days of history called the Dark Ages? Do you know? Because there were so many nights. Oh, okay. How about this one? Who invented fractions? Henry VIII? True story. Okay, how about this one? Why did the colonists wear, what did the colonists wear at the Boston Tea Party? Get this one, come on. T-shirts? Okay, 2 more. Who made King Arthur's Round Table? Circumference? Circle? All right, last one. What kind of music did the Pilgrims listen to? Plymouth Rock. There you go. Plymouth Rock. Get it? Party on. Okay. Anyway, so you get it. History can be at least interesting. So when we look at the history of Jesus, it's not just interesting, it changes. It's undeniable, it's unmistakable, it's lasting, and it's global. It literally changes everything. And his story doesn't just change history, but it's the story of our future. His story is the story of our future because it changes us. It gives hope to our future. It gives meaning to our present. And it makes a relationship with God personal. I think that's why Jesus' actions and his story is so unstoppable, because it's personal with us. Now, last week, we kind of dove into the biography of one of his earliest disciples, Matthew. Now, Matthew was an outsider. Really an outsider. I don't know if I covered this last week as much, but he was a tax collector. And tax collectors were hired by the Romans. They were Jewish people hired by the Romans to collect taxes. And oftentimes, they were hated because they didn't just collect taxes. They often collected more than they were due. They were considered traitors to the Jewish people. In fact, very often in the New Testament, they're lumped together with sinners, like tax collectors and sinners, like they're the same thing. So Matthew being a tax collector was a pretty bad deal. Yet he has this life-changing, history-changing, future-changing encounter with Jesus, so that he writes this biography of Jesus we call the Gospel of Matthew. And like I said, he was Jewish too. And so what he wants to do is connect Jesus as the Jewish Messiah to what he is doing in the moment. That God is not doing something out of left field, something totally different. This is not a new religion. But Jesus is bringing something new, a deeper relationship with God, a renewed relationship with God. He wants to connect those two things together. And so what he does, and we kind of covered this last week, is he takes the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, okay, these right here, and he said this was like what they really focused on in Jesus' day, like the Torah, this was it. And he writes his biography of Jesus based on these 5 books. And so he kind of takes them and he shapes them so that they have something that's familiar to them. Now, last week, several of you said you found this very interesting. You found history interesting. So I took this message today, I've kind of turned today's message to kind of connect with what we did last week. If you missed last week, what we said was, when he writes his gospel, he organizes it around these 5 books. Now remember, in the days these were written, so in the first century, there weren't chapters and verse numbers. There was no John 3:16, right? The words were there, but there was no reference to chapter 3, verse 16. So what they did to mark things was they used linguistic markers. They used certain words or phrases. Now, I know that's even more boring than history, linguistics, but the idea was that they could shape a document to teach you something by the way they wrote it. So, last week, Matthew did this. He divides his biography of Jesus into 5 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then he concludes with the resurrection and death of Jesus. Okay? Each of the 5 sections has 2 parts. A story part about Jesus doing stuff or stuff happening to him, and then he teaches about something. Each section goes together. And so last week, and by the way, one thing I want to say too, is that this wasn't just about Matthew doing something cool or getting a linguistic neat mark in his term paper. He was trying to connect with us, to show that this Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, is the Jewish Messiah, and did something different. He brought something new, a new covenant, a new way of thinking. He brought something new to us, and he shows that in what's different between the Torah and what he writes here. So, for example, last week we kind of focused on the miracles last week. We said there were 10 miracles, right? Matching the 10 plagues of Egypt. So you had the 10 plagues of Egypt, and then you had these miracles here. But the difference was Jesus' miracles in 8 and 9 are about people. People. He reaches out to people. Not about frogs or flies, but about curing individuals. He touched the untouchable. He broke traditional boundaries. He cared about those that no one else cared about. And that was unstoppable because he cared about people. Now, in chapter 10, he begins to talk to his disciples. So far, he's been building in his authority, in his power, right? And all this stuff here, he's kind of growing in his authority. And all of a sudden, he's going to turn and start talking to disciples. So let's look at chapter 10 for a second here. Chapter 10, verse 1. Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? Here's the 12 guys and says, I want you to cast out demons, cast unclean spirits, cure diseases. I want you to do those things. Now, what are those things they did? It's the same things that he did back here in 8 and 9. What he's saying to them is, I want you to go and do the same things I've been doing. Now, you may be getting stuck a little bit and say, wait a minute, you're telling me he wants us to go out and cast out demons and cure diseases and stuff? Well, before you get stuck on that, what was the most powerful miracle Jesus did in these chapters? Remember? Last week. Forgiveness. I heard it over here. Forgiveness. Remember that? It wasn't stilling the storm. It wasn't telling demons to go pack and get out of here. It wasn't even curing a mother-in-law, which is a big deal. That's tough. Cure a mother-in-law. What he did is he said, forgive. That was the big one. And we can do that too. So he calls on us to forgive. He impacts the world and makes it personal and wants us to carry on that message and that ministry. So he sends them off with this mission and a message. Verse 7. He says, as you go, proclaim the good news. And here's the good news. Here's what he says I want you to do. Here's the message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. God is near and God is here. I mean, they've been praying and hoping that God would return. They wanted that so badly that God would be with them. And now the message is, hey, God's showing up. God is near. And that was good news. And then he says, as you go with this message, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. So you proclaim the message, and you do the very same things I've been doing. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Now, all those four things have something in common. They're taking care of people. Proclaim the message, take care of people. And then he adds this last bit. You received without payment, give without payment. So I want you to go out, proclaim the message that God is showing up, take care of people, and don't ask for anything in return for it. In fact, God will take care of the bill. You do the work, and God will take care of you. That's an incredible mission. And when he calls us to, we talk about it all the time. We have a message for the world that God has come near. God cares about you and has come to you to take care of people's needs to the very best of our ability and depend on God's power and depend on God's taking care of us, to have the courage to go do it. We don't do it under our own power or for our own glory. We do it because God sent us. God took care of us. He came to us, and so we go and take care of people. That's the message that he has for them. Now, is that going to be easy for them? I mean, it's a great job description. Go take care of people, God will take care of you, but it's not going to be easy. Verse 16. He says, see, I am sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about what you are to speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given to you at that time. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. He says, look, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be rough. You're going to get beat up for this. Now, why would that happen? Well, partly because people like status quo. The people in power want to stay in power. And here comes Jesus, shake up the status quo. They want to keep in their shadows. They don't want to be exposed, keep things the way they are, and you're going to upset that. You're going to change that. You're going to take care of the ones that everyone else has forgotten about. You're going to go to those that no one else cares about. You're going to go to them and take care of them. And that's going to shake people up. They're not going to like it. But you go anyway. And, Jesus says, it's not going to be a surprise to me. It's not going to be a surprise that this is going to happen. It's not going to be like, oh, what, how did that? I had no idea. He knows it's going to happen. It's going to happen to him. But he says, go anyway. I got your back. And then in verse 28, he says this, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs on your head are counted. So do not be afraid. You are worth more value than many sparrows. He says, look, I'm going to take care of you. Even if they kill you, God will take care of you. You matter deeply to God, so don't be afraid of anybody. That's what he's saying here. And that kind of courage is unstoppable. It is. Opposition won't slow it down. Public opinion won't slow it down. The government won't slow it down. Nothing is going to stop this mission because God is behind it and has given them hope in their future, in their eternal future, and gives it to us as well. He says, don't be afraid. I got you. I'll be with you. I'll take care of you. You're worth so much to God that he even knows how many hairs are on your head. He'll take care of you. So I encourage you to read this entire chapter at some point. It's kind of like a great mission statement for who we are as disciples of Jesus, for us today as much as it was for those 12. And something else happens in there too. If you're like, wow, this is a pretty big job description for a person like me, go back and look at the 12 he did pick. In the same chapter, we get a listing of the 12 disciples. Now, you would think, all right, that if they're going to pick 12 people to be world changers for Jesus, the first 12, there'd be something like an NFL draft, right? In heaven, there's a big draft board comes up with all the best of the best, the smartest, and the most courageous, and the most faithful people, all on this big, huge board behind God, and God comes out and says, and with the first pick from the University of Northern Nazareth, Jesus picks as his disciple, whatever. I mean, you think of something along those lines. That's not what we get. We don't get the best of the best. Instead, we get in Matthew 10:2. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were fishermen, not Bible scholars, fishermen. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Another 2 guys that weren't priests or anything like that, or anything special. In fact, these 2 guys once wanted to call down fire from heaven on a city. Philip and Bartholomew. How about Thomas, the skeptic? Or Matthew, the tax collector? James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus? Simon, the Canaanian, or the zealot? Here's a guy that was advocating the violent overthrow of Rome. And Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. I mean, even in the very listing of these names, you get these are not the best guys in the world. He doesn't pick the best. And in fact, when you look at the New Testament stories of these guys, these are the same people that betrayed him, denied him. When things got tough, they took off and ran. They misunderstood him, said some pretty crazy things sometimes, confronted him on occasion. And yet these are the 12 that he picks to be world changers. Now, before we go any farther about why he picks these guys, let's kind of recognize one super important thing. Who do they look like? Who do they sound like? Us, right? I mean, they sound like us. I mean, I think I'd fit pretty well with these guys. They're everyday people who make mistakes, and lots of them. They're goofs sometimes. So when we have excuses about why God can't use me, or God can't use you because I'm too messed up or whatever, look at these guys. So are they. And they changed the world because Jesus changed them. So now let's look at, okay, why did he choose these guys and why does he choose us? Well, again, in 8 and 9, we said that Jesus' popularity was growing. Now, in the next section of Matthew, we get a section about opposition. Opposition. People are going to start looking at Jesus like, I'm not liking this. I mean, we already have the leaders kind of holding back on him, asking him questions. But in chapter 11, it's going to get personal. fact, the first person to really oppose Jesus is someone who's closest to him. And we know that when the people closest to us question us or doubt us, it hurts more than when strangers do that. Maybe you had someone in your life who has questioned you or doubted you, who's close to you, and you're like, that doesn't feel so good. It hurts because you think they know you and they trust you, and there's this conflict there, this doubt. Well, in chapter 11, it begins like this. Chapter 11, verse 2. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing. Now, who is this John first? When John heard. Well, John is John the Baptist. Who's John the Baptist? Jesus' cousin, a relative. He is the guy who baptized Jesus, who saw the heavens open and heard God say, this is the guy. In fact, later on in chapter 11, Jesus says that no one, nobody born on this earth is better than John the Baptist. This guy literally was the number one draft pick. Like, seriously. Can you imagine that having that on your wall at home? Number one human being by Jesus. Right? That's what it says about John. He is numero uno, the best. Then it says this. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, and get this, are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? What is John saying? I'm not sure you're the guy. Really? I mean, John, like you baptized me, you saw all that. And now you're questioning? I mean, you see what he's doing and that's not good enough? You see what he's doing in the world and that's not meeting your expectations? And you're going to say, hey, either get to work or we're going to find somebody else? Or are you wondering like who he is? I mean, this is a pretty kind of harsh statement. Why would John say something like this? We've all been there, by the way. We doubt sometimes. We have struggles. We're like, well, where is he? He's in prison. And why is he in prison? Because he stood up to the king. He stood up for God. And the king threw him in jail. He's going to behead him here pretty soon. And he's struggling. We all have those dark nights, those struggling moments. And John has one. He thought the Messiah would be unstoppable. He would do something different than what he's doing. It didn't meet his expectations. And so he questions Jesus. But here's the key. He questions Jesus. He doesn't gossip about it. He doesn't go off and tell somebody else. He doesn't just quit. He asks the question. He goes to Jesus with his doubt. Lou Holtz was the coach of Notre Dame. He said, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% what you do about it. John did something about it. He went to Jesus. Jesus answered him. He didn't say to him, you little faith, or how dare you question me? Who do you think you are? This is what he said in verse 4. Go and tell John what you hear and what you see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. He says, John, what am I doing? I'm doing the very things that God said I would do in the prophets. I'm taking care of people. The blind see, the lame walk, the poor hear the good news. I'm taking care of people because God cares about people, John. That's what I'm doing. And that was enough for John. Jesus said, don't forget, John, God cares about people, and so do I. Which gets to the heart of these disciples. What did they all have in common? They make huge mistakes. They deny him. They doubt him. We have people like doubting Thomas, Peter's denial. In fact, in Matthew 28, the last chapter of Matthew's gospel, the last scene we have with the disciples. Jesus has risen from the dead. He says, go meet me in Galilee on a mountain I will show you. They go there. Jesus is standing there, risen from the dead. And it says in the last few verses of Matthew, there they worshiped him, and some doubted. Dude, he's standing right there. And still they doubted. And we hear about it. That's the common theme. We know their stories. They didn't scrub the history. Who wrote this? Matthew, the tax collector, who doubted and struggled and made mistakes, and his buddies with him. He tells us their stories because it wasn't about them. It was about this Jesus who changed their past. Their history was revised, their present renewed, and their future reset. He changed them, and they changed the world. And he changes us too. So they told their stories just as they were, about how bad they messed up, about how low they were on the draft boards, and yet Jesus got a hold of them and changed them. In a moment, we're going to be singing a song that has these lyrics to it. You have searched me, there's nothing you don't see. You have witnessed my triumphs and my falls, and you have loved me through it all. That sums it up. God sees all the mistakes and all the goof-ups. He sees it all and still loves us and still changes us. It takes people like us, like them, and makes us world changers. He knows us, and he still puts us on the top of his draft board. He knows us, and he still invites us to dinner. You know, that night that he was betrayed and he shared the Last Supper with his disciples, he shared Passover with them. He knew that night they were going to betray him. He knew that night they're going to run off into the darkness. He knew they would go hide. He knew that, and he still had dinner with them. And he said, we'll have dinner again later in my Father's kingdom. His love for them changed them. And his love for us changes us. Changes us because he loves us and he cares about us. Let's pray together.